Hey guys, Jacob here. This is going to be a brand new build video for the Division 2. I know I haven't been posting that many build videos for you guys like I said I was going to, but lately I just not had time to really sit down and make something for you guys. I've had a few ideas that I'm going to post, and I've decided that I'm actually going to start uploading those and show you guys what they are. You guys did see the raid crit build a while back, which was the DNH style build with Fenris that was mostly designed strictly for the raid for high crits and high damage to elites, that I essentially use mostly on Razorback and fighting some of the bosses in there, not necessarily the NPCs. But this is going to be my new PVE normal build, I guess you could call it, instead of going into the raid. This is mostly what I use for challenging missions and just farming every day to get gear I need. This is what the build looks like. It's based around 3-piece DNH, Fenris, Gila, and Alp Summit. I'm going to go over the weapons first and tell you guys why I'm using those, and then I'll cover the specialization in these skills as well. First is going to be the primary weapon, which is going to be the Eagle Bear Assault Rifle. If you guys are not familiar with this weapon, it is an exotic weapon you can actually acquire from the raid. It may take you multiple times to get this weapon. It took me a very long time. If you guys have been viewing this channel for a while, you understand that it took me like 36 plus times to finally get this, and actually had to have a friend drop it for me because my luck is just that bad. I guess RNG just does not like me at all. But the damage on this is 25.6, just a reminder that can depend on what build you have and how high you have your damage mods and how high you have your base damage on your gear. 750 RPM, it is a little bit slower compared to a standard P416 with Allegro, which is 825. So if you guys want a little bit higher weapon, you could always have an alternative weapon, which I'll go over too. 60 rounds in the magazine. If you guys are not familiar with these talents, I will go over them as well. Eagle Strike, which is the first talent. Accuracy increases as you continuously fire up to 100%. Headshot kills grant 100% reload speed, 50% damage, and the tenacity buff for 10 seconds. The strength of tenacity is increased by 1% for body shots and 5% for headshots. Next is going to be tenacity. 40 to 80% of your damage is delayed until the buff expires. All of the total delayed damage is reduced for each enemy killed while the buff is active up to 100% with 3 kills. Protected fire, which is while holstered, gain 10% bonus armor while firing your current weapon. So if you have this weapon holstered in your face, tanking someone like an NPC or a player with this weapon, you will actually have 10% bonus armor. Now the attachments on this weapon, which are a little bit higher than your standard attachments: 10% crit chance, which is on the iron sights. You're going to get 15% crit damage, which is pretty high on a muzzle. That's the highest you're going to get on an attachment in the game at the moment. They could always come out with something that's a little bit higher for crit damage on an AR, obviously, if they make a different exotic rifle. And then the 10% stability on the Talon grips, and the 60 round magazine, which is plus 30 instead of plus 20, so you're actually going to get a total of 60 rounds in this weapon. Now to the secondaries. There are actually multiple guns you can use on this build. You can have the Police M4, you can have the custom P416, a FAMAS. There's many guns you can use. You can even use an ACR or a G36 if you wanted. But I'm using the Police M4 at the moment, with hitting at 21.9, 935 RPM with 50 rounds in the magazine. I am using measured and Allegro due to the fact that this is just a gun I've been kind of testing and messing around with. I do have alternative weapons. You can use Ranger and Allegro if you want to use it on a P416, or Ranger and Allegro if you want to use it on a FAMAS or this weapon here. But measured, the top half of the magazine has 20% rate of fire and negative 15% weapon damage. The bottom half of the magazine has negative 20% rate of fire and 30% total weapon damage. So you're actually going to get 30% total weapon damage when you're at the bottom half of the magazine, which will allow you to hit NPCs or even players if you use this weapon in PvP a little bit harder. Allegro, which is 10% rate of fire, so you'll get a little bit of rate of fire buff with measured. So this weapon is actually, higher than 935 because you have measured on it. Next is going to be grease. While holstered, weapon swap speed is increased by 10%. And the attachments I'm using on this weapon, which I would recommend using these if you're using a different gun like the FAMAS or the P416, is the EXP hollow sight to get that 8% damage to elites. The muzzle, which is 5% damage to elites, which you guys can also use something like, if you're not a fan of the Police M4, all these style weapons, you can always use an AK, and they have the same attachments you can use, only they're 7.62. Next is going to be the laser pointer for 5% crit chance. If you want a little bit more stability on this weapon, you can always change the muzzle from damage to elites to stability, or you can put something on like the angled grip for stability, or if you want more crit damage, you can change that as well. The magazine, which is the sturdy extended 5.56 mag with plus 20 rounds and negative 10% reload speed. If you want to kind of counteract the reload speed a little bit, you can always put the hand stop on it to get the 10% reload speed to counteract that a little bit. That way you're reloading a little bit faster. Now that's it for the first two weapons, and now the sidearm. The sidearm I'm using, which I don't really use sidearms that often. You guys will see I only have two in my inventory at the moment, due to the fact that I just don't really use them that often, and I'm using the Orbit pistol, which has perfect finisher. Swapping from this weapon within 10 seconds of a killing an enemy grants 40% crit chance and 50% crit damage for 15 seconds. This does require 4 or less utility, so I have none on this build, so it's perfect for me to use it to shoot a player or an NPC, and you can swap back to your normal weapon and get the 40% crit chance and 50% crit damage for 15 seconds. I have optimized on here for 15% weapon handling. I wish it was jazz hands so I can reload this gun a little bit faster, because I do tend to shoot NPCs with it, so I can proc perfect finisher and overlap all holster, gain 5% weapon handling on your weapon. Now, the attachments I'm using on this is the plus 20 reload speed drum and the 10% damage to elite short reflex sight. Now I'll be covering the gear. The first piece is going to be the D&H mask. If you guys are not familiar, D&H, which is the 3-piece, or the brand set 3-piece, which is 5% accuracy, 10% crit damage, and 7% crit chance. You can always flip this build with Wyvern if you want to get a little more crit chance and crit damage, but I found out it was a little bit easier for me to get the pieces I needed with D&H. But this mask has 6% crit chance, 53% damage to elites, which is pretty high, so you actually have double red, so you get crit chance and damage to elites. If you don't want to have crit chance, you could always spec more health into your mask and have more health on this build. Then we have Perfect Concussion, which does require 7 or more offensive mods. Headshots grants 20% headshot damage for 2 seconds, 5 seconds marksman rifles. I know you guys are probably saying you could use something else on here. You could use Dialed In if you want to, if you have that on a roll on a mask you really want to use. You can always flip the pieces as well if you don't want to use certain pieces. You can flip them. Say you don't want to use a holster that's Hela, you could always flip that with D&H and always change the mask to something that's a little bit different. But if you have Perfect Concussion, that's going to give you 20% headshot damage for 2 seconds. I know that's really short, but if you're shooting an NPC, you actually can just, proc that real quick and just shoot them in the head with it. Now to the backpack, which is 13% crit chance, 16,000 health, and 4.5% weapon damage. You guys obviously can find way better backpacks than this, but like I said, this is the one that works for me. And this is the one where I rolled the 13% crit chance that I had on at the time. And if you can find one that's a little bit higher weapon damage, I recommend using that. And we have Spark, which is damage enemies with skills or explosives grant 15% weapon damage for 15 seconds. So you can use something like a drone, you can use something like a grenade, a seeker, stuff like that, and you'll get weapon damage for 15 seconds. This does require 9 or more reds, so this build is based around reds, as you guys can see here, and strictly damage. Harden, which is 15% armor, so that's going to buff your armor a little bit more. Make sure you guys do not have double attributes on your chest piece and your backpack for Harden, so you're kind of just wasting a talent there, so just remember that. And the offensive mod on here is a 3% assault rifle with 3% SMG and 1.5% weapon damage. And you're probably wondering why there's SMG on there. The main reason is due to the fact that sometimes I do use SMGs on this build, due to the fact that if you're in PVE or PvP, mostly PvE, if you run out of rounds in your AR and you cannot find ammunition, or if you just want to switch it up a little bit and use something besides double ARs. Now to the gloves. These are the Alps Summit gloves, which give you 20% skill haste. If you want a little bit more health, you could always spec into Murakami gloves, so you get the the percentage from health on there, which I'll show you guys right now. This is a good example. 8%. You'll see it goes to 127. That's with 10,000 health. So if you guys have want a little bit more health, you can always spec into Murakami gloves and get a little more health on this build. But these do have 10% assault rifle damage on these. I know you can get this a little bit higher. I actually got the 13% assault rifle gloves that Cassie Mendoza was selling, and I plan on rolling that stat onto these gloves to make it a little bit stronger, due to the fact that I can use these builds or use these gloves on a lot of builds for PvP. Devastating, which is 5% weapon damage, and the offensive mod on this is a 3% assault rifle mod, 1% damage to armor, and 2% weapon damage. If you guys have 6% assault rifle damage with 1% weapon damage and 1% damage to armor, I highly recommend using those due to the fact it will make your weapon damage a lot higher. Now, the third DNH piece, which is going to be 8.5% crit chance and composure. While in cover, grants 10% total weapon damage. This does require 11 or more reds, so you can lose a little bit of reds if you want to change your gloves. If you really want to, you can use lose a few because you still have 14. I do have a mod here that's 1.5% weapon damage, 2% damage to armor, and 2% assault rifle damage. Now the holster, which is 40,000 health and 10% crit chance. If you want to get the health down and if you don't really care that much, due to the fact this build is mostly designed for you guys sitting in cover and not really shooting like close quarters, stuff like that, you can change the health to crit damage if you want a higher crit damage roll. The mods I'm using on here are 1.5% weapon damage, 4% assault rifle, and 2% marksman rifle damage, and 4% assault rifle with 1% weapon damage. Now the final piece is going to be the chest piece with 7% crit chance and 7.5% weapon damage and 17,000 health. This is a Fenris chest piece. You're going to get the 10% assault rifle damage bonus from the one piece just using this, and Vigilance, which is gain 25% weapon damage, taking damage, disable this buff for 4 seconds. Hard hitting, which is 25% damage to elites. So you're going to get your damage to elites mostly from your chest piece and your mask. So just remember that. You can always flip these pieces if you have a chest piece that doesn't have hard hitting on it but Vigilance, and you have something like Vital rolled onto it. You could always put something like hard hitting on your mask instead and run it like that with damage to elites. Something kind of like this mask right here. Now, the chest piece does have a defensive mod on it, which is 4,594 armor with 2% health and 4,700 health as well. So you guys can always change that if you want to. Now, I'll go into the skills. I am using the drone, which this doesn't really matter what you use, but the drone for me is probably the best due to the fact you can actually keep throwing the drone over and over and over again and actually proc spark and let it shoot NPCs, and you'll get that constant 15% weapon damage for 15 seconds over and over and over again. Now the next thing is going to be the heal, which I'm using sharpshooter. If you're using survivalists, you can always use the seeker mine, but I'm using the chem launcher just to get heals back while I'm in cover so I don't waste all my armor kits. Now I'll go over the DPS on this build real quick and show you guys the damage on it depending on what weapon you're using. This is the measured Police M4. That's with a red bar for normal, and I'll change it to the named, so you guys can see what it is on the named. Alright, when you guys go into cover, you'll see composure procs and you have vigilance procs as well. I mostly designed this build for being in cover and sitting at a distance and hitting NPCs from a distance, so if you guys want to use a rifle in this build, you can do that as well. But when you proc spark, which is from the drone, you can send this after another NPC, and it will actually proc spark in the bottom corner there, so you have all three of these procs. That's the DPS the first time around. I'll show you guys it again. That's it with the Police M4. And I'll clear it and use the Eagle Bear. And that's the DPS. And you also can see the damage last hit is 222,000. But just a reminder, this is a more of a style build where you're going to be in cover hitting NPCs at a distance. You can use this close quarters if you have to. That's what you have Spark for, and you have high weapon damage. And basically, if you're face tanking an NPC like this, when you shoot your gun, you're going to get the extra armor from the Eagle Bear a little bit, so you can actually take down NPCs a little bit easier when they're right in your face. Now, I'll go over the stats as well first on the Eagle Bear for some of you guys who want to see them. You can see all the weapon talents here I am using, and I'll go into the stats right here. You can see I'm hitting at 25,000 weapon damage and 17,000 PvP damage, so you can convert this to a PvE build if you wanted to try it out in there, but I recommend us using this in PvE. At least this style, you can always convert it if you want to try it out in PvP. 60% crit chance with 50% crit damage, 55% headshot damage, 35% of the range. You can see the accuracy and stability. Stability is from the Talon Grip and the breath control from stability on the sharpshooter. That's why I'm using it. And you can see the weapon handling and all the stuff like this for the bonuses. And you can see the damage to elites is 78 on the Eagle Bear. But when you go to something like the Police M4 and throw this on and go to the stats, they will change to the fact it's a different weapon. You can see you're hitting at 57 crit chance and 35 crit damage, 55% headshot damage, 30% stability, and also when you go down to the DT, you'll see you're hitting at 91% damage to elites. Overall, that's from the Punch Drunk Mask, the Hollow Sight, the Muzzle Brake, and Hard Hitting rolled onto the gear. But that's just a quick little video, guys. I wanted to share that with you and show you guys what I've been pretty much using in PVE. Overall, I'm combining this with Spark and Composure and Vigilance. So when you guys are in cover, you guys will see, like I said, it does proc, so you can use all these to your advantage and hit NPCs at a distance and just absolutely rip through them. But that's about it, guys. Thank you all for watching. Make sure you guys subscribe for more Division 2 content if you're new to the channel. And as always, I will catch you guys in the next one.